Please take your seats. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. The program will begin shortly.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's try it again. It's that lunchtime vibe. So you know we're going to need some energy here. Good afternoon. All right, that's more like it. I have the great honor of being in conversation with Dr. Tequilla, Brownie, and Aylon, Samouha, as we really talk about intentional cross-collaboration and what that means in deep engagement and partnership with students and families and communities. And so I'm so eager to learn with and from them. And so with that, I'm gonna do just some very quick introductions so that we can get into the conversation because our time is limited. So I'll just ask that you bear with me because I wanna make sure I do justice and honor to their leadership and to their work. I am thrilled to introduce Aylon. He is the CEO and co-founder of Transcend, a nonprofit that partners with school communities to design and spread innovative learning environments so all young people can thrive. I've known Aylon for quite some time, and so with over 20 years of experience, he has been driving education innovation with his team, working shoulder to shoulder with so many schools to design innovation solutions and models for today's learners. And so thank you, Aylon, for being here and for sharing your insight. And Dr. Tequilla Brownie, she is the CEO of TNTP. I have read so many of the white papers from TNTP, and so it's a real honor. Under her leadership, TNTP partners with 4,000 systems in 41 states, unlocking economic and social mobility for all young people. And so thank you for also allowing us to learn. And so over the time, actually, not just being here, my bus rides, the last 24 hours, literally, I have been in conversation where people have been talking about we are at a moment in time when people are stepping back from education. They're stepping back from education, they're questioning whether progress still remains, whether that is still possible. And so then I get to be on a stage with the two of you all, two people that I know have continued in this work. Not only have you continued, you've deepened your impact in it. Like Aylon, I had the great honor of this Learning for All book where I'm like, okay, Aylon's 10 toes deep. Like, I'm all in it. Tequilla, I got to see some of the work of your team in terms of putting out the word, in terms of what the data says and what that means about scaling impact. Tell me what continues to drive you to stay in it when everyone in the conversation is saying, I don't know. Aylon, let's start with you.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for being our moderator. It's so good to be here with both of you. So for me, I'm a parent of a 13-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. And like so many parents, when I say, how's school today? I get, what do I get? Okay. Fine. Right, exactly. And we know what that means, right? At best, it means it was a mediocre day. And at worst, it means actually, something that was harmful or painful. And we spend 15,000 hours in school from K to 12. And that's a lot of time of human potential, of the possibility for human flourishing, where for me as a parent of 2 children, and for us as a society with, billions of kids, but 75 million in this country, that's just not good enough. It's not good enough for every kid, and I think as we're seeing today in society, it's certainly not good enough for society. And so that's what keeps me going every day is I don't think we have a choice. Any of the issues we care about, from democracy to the environment to equity, et cetera, cannot be solved without education being at the center.
Thank you first for having me here as well, and I'd name sort of 2 bookends for me. One is my own lived experience. I grew up in the Deep South in the Delta, in a house without even indoor plumbing. Yes, in this great United States of America. I chopped cotton as a child, and no, I'm not 100. This was truth in the Deep South. Education literally shifted the very trajectory of my life. As we commit to and we promise that education is that great equalizer. So that was my story. Fast forward, many of you are familiar with TNTP's report, The Opportunity Myth, where we tracked students all around the country and we looked at what was their experience and how were they experiencing school. So we went back to some of those students recently to just find out, hey, how are you doing? What do you think? One particular student that we highlighted in our recent paper, The Paths of Opportunity, Noe, actually told us that Noe was actually gifted in math. Nobody knew it. Here was a child who had aspirations to actually work for Citigroup. No one even knew he was in math until a teacher finally noticed, said, hey, you should take an AP math course. He did, was successful. Not only did he finish high school, he went on to college, graduated from college, and after, I don't know, double-digit attempts, finally got an entry-level job with Citigroup. He now is a homeowner, thriving, saving, caring for his family. But when I think about what could have been my end, when I think about what could have been and almost was Noe's end, that is unacceptable. If what we purport, that education is that great equalizer, that's why I cannot give up. Our children's lives, and therefore our very own, actually depends on it.
Oh, thank you for saying that, especially the piece around our very own lives depends on the future of our children. Thank you for talking about asking your children. I have a 6-year-old, and so every day is good. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Give me a little bit more. And Aylon has had the privilege of being around me with my child and helping me ask the right questions so that you can get to the source of what's happening with kids, because they have all of the answers. They have the thoughts about what's working and what's not working, and they are the future. We are bound to them and by them, so thank you for that.
Whitney Houston told us. The children are our future.
They are our future. They are our future. Okay, so let's level set, because there is so much information that's out there in terms of the current state of affairs in education, in terms of what the data says. We've had the pandemic. Bring us into, because I just think it's so important when we're talking about, so what do you do, to first start with where are we, and are we all seeing the same thing and interpreting it the same way? So I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about how you make meaning of where we are right now.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say, we saw our recent NAEP results right in the fall. The one thing I just have to start this conversation is to remind us all why Congress authorized NAEP in the first place. They didn't authorize NAEP to say, oh, here is a point-in-time measure of where our children are, and if they're not doing well, let's give up on them. They said, let's measure, let's monitor, and then let's actually innovate and improve through policies and strategies. And so while, yes, what we see in the data is absolutely not acceptable, even some of the places, and they should be celebrated, that made gains that were pre-COVID, there was actually an article in the New York Times, I think maybe today or yesterday. Anybody see that? If you looked at where the sort of downward trend started, it was 2013. You all saw that? Some of you have seen that article, which tells us that something has been broken for a while with our education system. Now, do we divest? Absolutely not. What we do is actually, yes, you have this data. We have to really use it surgically, right, to understand, and from a diagnostic perspective, just like if one went to the emergency room. Who just wants a random antibiotic off the shelf? Hello? Right? And so we can't do that with our kids. We have to understand what they need and then treat it accordingly. And yes, absolutely progress monitor and improve along the way. So the level set, I would say, is getting back to COVID is where we were before COVID. That is a good, big, important step. The downward trend, we had made progress. Contrary to what everyone is sort of saying right now, the 40 years of education reform since A Nation at Risk, we actually were making steady progress, particularly for some of our most vulnerable students. Now, COVID did send the achievement gap backwards 30 years. We got work to do.
Thank you for providing that context. And what I'll say with that backdrop is that I'm seeing a engagement crisis in schools that I think correlates to the same timeline that you just shared, where there's so many ways of looking at it, but let's just, from a learning science perspective, look at it for a moment and say, learning happens when there's engagement, and no learning has ever happened without it. And so in the very least, engagement is a precursor for learning. And the data that we see is disappointing. You know, look at it from a few different angles. Chronic absenteeism is the highest it's been in a long time. 1 in 4 kids was chronically absent from school last year. When you ask kids, what about school? Let's see, I'll give you a couple of my unfortunate favorites. 2 out of 10 say they love school. 3 out of 10 basically say it's a waste of time. You ask kids, do you love school? In 3rd grade, 75% say they love school. By 10th grade, 25% say they love school. We give a LEAP survey, which is our kind of the experience survey that we give at Transcend. We've given it to about 70,000 kids. We will consistently get things like 20% of kids saying the learning is relevant to them, 20 or 30% saying they feel like they're in charge of their learning. The list goes on. And to me, what was true in 2013 and what's still true today is that school was not designed to maximize engagement. It was designed 100 years ago to prepare kids for farm and factory work. It was meant to be rote. It was meant to have unequal expectations for different kids. And to the extent we had progress over the last few decades, we were changing some of that. We were actually saying we have high expectations for all kids. That's not how school was designed originally, right? The part of the reason why I'm leaning into this is because I think there's more we can do to increase engagement. And when we see schools really prioritize that, you see changes almost immediately. I've seen 20% of kids saying relevant to 80% saying kids' learning was relevant in a matter of weeks. It is so possible. They want to be engaged, right? I'll say one last thing, which is I play a game sometimes with Uber because I'm, going to airports a lot, just like both of you. And they'll ask me what I do. We talk, and then I'll say, well, so do you love learning? And they're like, I love learning. I'm like, tell me about a time where you were wildly engaged to learn. They tell me a story. I'm like, tell me one about in school that happening, because it's never a story about school, and they can't tell me, right? And when I look at my own life, I think it's the same way. This place where we spend 15,000 hours should be the place where I'm wildly motivated, wildly engaged to learn, and it's not designed to do that.
Aylon, you said something, you've been using the word engagement. And in reading your book, I see so many different examples of what that means. So I know there's no one answer to that, but in order to ensure that everyone here understands what you mean when you say engagement, can you give a little flavor of what does engagement mean to you in the layman terms, in terms of make it accessible to everyone?
Yeah. So first, I'll say, I think we all know what it is when we feel it, right? We're in flow. We want to learn the next thing. We lose track of time, right? For me, it's jazz guitar, where I could be playing something for 2 hours, and I look up, I'm like, oh my, I have to go to bed. I can't believe how long I've been doing this for. So I will say, I think we all know when we see it and when we're experiencing it. And there's a lot of ways of defining it, but one way that I found helpful is, what are the drivers of that state of flow, et cetera? And both the science, but also when we talk to kids and teachers, what we learn is that it's one part intellectual engagement, like there's something to solve, there's something difficult, right? Something cool, so it gets the brain working. When that's paired with some level of empowerment, some level of agency, I get to decide something about this. You get another level, right? So it's not just that it's hard, but I get to be in charge of it. And when both those things are true, and I feel a sense of connection and community with others, where I feel a sense of belonging, or my identity is affirmed or built, and I don't have the stereotype threat, but quite the opposite. I have I'm supposed to be here, right? And I feel connected. When you've got all that happening, you get to those levels of engagement that I think we've all felt before and seen, in our own kids or in classrooms, et cetera.
Thank you, Aylon. Tequilla, you mentioned something around, we have this report. It makes it clear to data that this is unacceptable in terms of what should be available to all students and all learners. And at the same time, sometimes a story can be painted that no progress has been made. And so you started to mention this fact that progress has been made. Can you help us see through your eyes what's the progress that you see that has been made for the rest of the team?
Sure. I mean, two different reports I'll highlight quickly here. So in paths of opportunity, think about Chetty's work. Chetty has done a lot of great work in measuring economic and social mobility. And so we decided as an organization, you know, at TNTP, we sit at that intersection of research, policy, and implementation, right, practice. And so we said it's good to know that information. Now what are you going to do about it, right, beyond just measuring? And so we dug in looking at the actual academic data through the National Study Survey of Longitudinal Survey of Youth. And in that, what we found is that for high school students who experience poverty at any point in their lives, on average, they had about a 31% chance of getting to a living wage by the age of 30. And now let's all agree that is the floor, not the ceiling. Now, when they had high academic outcomes, they had access to the type of experience that Aylon is describing, that number actually doubled, right? It goes to 58%. Now, that's still a coin's toss. I want better chances than that for my 15-year-old. But guess what? If they didn't have access to a strong academic experience, that number dropped to 21%. So it tells us that access to a good educational experience, it changes the outcomes for children. And when it doesn't, it gets to that. The interesting thing, though, we found in that data, you look at just middle-class kids on average, the number was about 63%. Right, I see some surprises. That tells us our best and brightest students in high school who are working very hard still aren't as likely to get to just a living wage than a child who just was lucky enough to be born into at least a middle-income family. Again, for us, we don't stop there just measuring. So we started to dig into our own research with the 6,000, districts that we serve, looking at research all over, and we started to emerge some things. Those unicorns that made it, what was true for them? It's hiding in plain sight. Then we also looked at, hey, those middle-class kids, we all know about the high school grooming, right? We know that. So while some of us are telling kids, oh, don't go to college, we have others paying people to get in, right? I'm not supposed, okay, okay. So, but my point is, when you look at that, 4 other things besides academics emerge. Academics, foundational, it's a non-starter. Kids will not be economically mobile if they are illiterate or don't have numeracy. But what else we found? Social capital, access to networks. What we also found, early exposure and intentionality around career-connected learning. You talk about engagement, you ask a 5-year-old what they want to be, they don't look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. They play back whatever they've been exposed to. We actually can and should do that work much earlier. My 15-year-old, I love him. He left my front door open last night, and I'm in San Diego. Now, do you think that boy is going to be ready for somebody's apprenticeship tomorrow, right, when he turns 16? And so my point is, you have to start early there are a lot of people divesting from K-12 right now, as if our kids are going to wake up magically ready for apprenticeships when they're reading on a 2nd grade level. How dare us? The 4th one is personal support. Now, I had an advisor in college who helped me navigate and figure out what I wanted to do. If we know that college students need that type of mapping and guiding, why on earth do we leave it to chance for our younger children to do that? So within K-12, we need that. And the last one is civic and community engagement. If you look at all the survey data for this generation, they're passionate, they're motivated about our world. They're seeking purpose. We have to harness that. So I think to what Aylon is getting at with the engagement, those 5 factors to me, I was a psych major. Any psych majors in the room? Yes, right? Motivational theories, right? Expectancy theory. That's how we unlock how to turn on that engagement. We talk about wanting kids to be intrinsically motivated. I actually think there's a way to that, and it's the types of things that Aylon has written about and what we're finding in our work with our young people.
Okay, I'm going to eventually come back to you because I want to hear from you. Like, where do you start? Like, how do you get started? It's like, okay, so I'm not there.
I have an opinion on that.
Yeah, how do you get started? But Aylon, I'm going to have you join in because a lot of the work that you do is like the school partnerships, helping people redesign how to even think about engagement and hearing from the students and being the bedrock of how work is done. Can you bring us into what you see as some best practices, some good thoughts that should give us hopefulness for the possibilities ahead? Yeah, I'm going to have you start there, and then I'm going to come back to you, Tequilla, because I want to definitely hear about that piece.
So our answer to this question starts with a process of students, families, educators, other experts, what we call the community, but broadly, coming together to interrogate what does school need to be? What's the purpose of it? What do our young people need? Where are we at today? Let's look at the mirror. Let's look at what the future demands. Let's look at what the science says. Let's look at what other inspiring things are happening elsewhere. And we have found that when folks go through processes like these, they very quickly discover what's going on with their kids, and they build both the conditions for change, which would be the coalition, the shared conviction, the clarity about what the change takes, but also they start to imagine a different kind of design. And when they can bring ideas from other places, because one thing that we do in education that we don't do in other sectors is we ask people to be both on the front line and be the inventors of the future at the same time, right? It would be like asking a doctor who's serving patients to also come up with a vaccine in the same week, right? And so we're not trying to put educators in that position. I remember when I started in this work, about a decade ago, maybe a lot longer than that. Shoo.
I know,
but
like,
just on the
Aylon,
information
tell the
time, I know we
truth,
won't.
You're
I
not
know.
20.
I know. I used to have. We were talking about personalization, right? And I remember coming to conferences like this, and it felt like what we were saying was, if you give a teacher $50,000 and a set of iPads, they'll reinvent school. And I think we've gotten more sophisticated since then, but I'm not sure if we've completely pivoted from that conception. And so what we've seen is when communities go on these journeys and can implement evidence-based practices that are packaged and codified, but then that they can implement in their own context, make it their own, build their own local evidence, right? Stitch it together cohesively with other ideas that are already present or that also they're importing from other places, that we start to see real difference. For example, the Brooklyn Steam Center in New York took the best of, I would say, CTE practices from around the country, the best of mentorship and internship practices, the best of goal setting and some of the, getting yourself in charge and in the driver's seat practices from actually not even in education. We stitch those together, and today there are hundreds of 11th and 12th graders in New York. They come from 8 high schools in New York Public DOE that go to the Brooklyn Steam Center for half the day during 11th and 12th grade for 2 years, getting certification in design, technology, construction, and they, these are real credentials that they get real jobs with, and even when they go to college, because a lot of them go to college, they're making money while they're going to college, right, and setting themselves up, and all the things are happening, right? They're intellectually engaged, they are connected to the community, to each other, to industry professionals that serve as mentors, and they feel like they're in charge, right, because they are. And so those kinds of things, what I'm seeing in rural communities, right, where some of the conditions are so rich, as you know, right, because it's small, right? The superintendent is in the grocery store with the parent and the kids, right? We've seen in the course of a year, students go from, it brought tears to my eyes when I heard it, this young lady in Clear Creek, Colorado, a small rural community. She was part of one of these processes where they decided together, ironically, the creek of Clear Creek was not clear, and so they decided we need to figure out how to clean this creek. And they learned a lot of science, and the quote that I'll never forget that she said to a bunch of us was, "I used to feel like I didn't have value. I used to feel worthless. And now I know I have a purpose," right? And when I see that, and it's not just by luck and there happened to be a good teacher, but a very intentional process of interrogating what does our community need, but not leaving it, not saying and just go figure it out on your own, but providing some of those answers along the way, magic happens.
Tequilla, so you gave me the principles, right? You were talking about civic engagement, like the belief that we have to have in our students and our children. Tell me a little bit about someone says, right, this is where I am. I'm not even sure how to get there. You said you had some thoughts for us on like what to do now to get started.
Yes, I'm going to take us back a little bit in the opportunity myth. Two big findings from that report that we talked about. Within the walls of the school system, what needed to be true, and we identified those 4 resources: high quality instructional materials, rigorous instruction, student engagement, and access to educators who had high expectations. High expectations is free, am I right?
Right. Well,
Okay, so that was the first one. The other side of that coin that a lot of folks didn't pay attention to, but that we dug into at TNTP was authentic community engagement. Because one of the things that's been happening is we put on the backs of education the things that as a nation we're kind of too cowardly to deal with as a whole. And so now even the wars that we're seeing play out in all of our educational institutions, they're representative of broader societal problems. And so when we try to help our schools focus on what they're supposed to do, which is provide our young people with a solid academic experience, we decided to dig in and say, okay, yes, here were those 4 resources. How do you bring that to life? And so one of the problems, a crisis, I should say, facing our nation right now is the number of students that are behind grade level. Now, I've been in debates, folks, about like, oh, we got to add a 13th year or 14th year. I'm like, we can't get kids to stay 12 years right now, so good luck with that. Like, that can't necessarily be the answer. We went through the data as an org and found a handful of schools who had at least a 10-year history of helping kids get back on grade level. And so we said, well, that's key right there, because again, how do you convince a young person to try? So we dug in deep, both quantitative and qualitative. What were those schools doing? 3 big findings came out of that report: opportunity makers. Those schools are making opportunities for kids. You caught that, right? Okay, just checking. Consistency, coherence, and belonging. Wow. Consistency, that means you're stacking good days. It's not that 2 days out of the week that kid has access to those 4 resources. They consistently did. That coherence, they're not learning about some random acts of something in intervention and then something totally different and disconnected in their tier 1 instruction. There's coherence, let alone what's happening in out of school time. And then that sense of belonging. Kids actually feel seen and heard, and they feel like they belong in that school. Those 3 things, those were the things. It's in the data, right? Kind of unassailable. The schools that were doing those 3 things are the ones that were getting kids back on track and have a consistent pattern of doing so. So if I were to say where to start at that school level, schools should look at those practices. We lay them out. They're on our website, open resource. Yes, you're welcome. But resources that schools can start implementing now to begin to help kids get back on grade level so that we can, that's the floor, getting on grade level. Can we agree to that? Yeah. Being on grade level is the floor. That is not the North Star. Helping kids get back on grade level and then making it be true that more than that 58% of kids from poverty, that coin toss, can get to at least, my God, a living wage by the age of 30. Wow. That's what we have our sights set on at TNTP.
Wow, thank you for that. And Aylon, you talked about the example from the community, right? Like we're there, how you're going to clean this thing up. You have a small group of people where you're engaging deeply. You allow them to lead, but you help them see the answers within themselves while giving them a support system. Some might say, that sounds really good, but that's like a small population. Like, how do you do that at scale? Do you have any thoughts about how we think about translating that to transform a broader ecosystem?
Yes, thanks for asking that. And I just want to add a couple things to what Tequilla said. In support of it. One is when we're seeing the same thing, that right, like where yes we are, right, and actually what's really like we did this because we happened to be in conversation and literally discovered, oh my God, we're literally saying the same things. We have to talk about this together. So that's the origin story. Okay, but one of those things is that when those experiences are changing that you just pointed to, we're seeing grade point averages increase. We're seeing test scores increase. We're seeing absenteeism go down. I mean, it is, and we're looking at different data and coming to the same conclusions, right? So just wanted to, really put an exclamation point on that. And then the other thing is that consistency and coherence and belonging that you're talking about, that is the objective of the design, right? That those places that you're talking about, whether they called it design or not, they have built something that is different than that, and that's why we're seeing that exceptional data, right? Like, they're not just doing the same old design, but executing it a little bit better. No, they're actually making different design choices and executing it better, right? And so then the question is, how do we bring that to scale, right? And one thing that we've seen is that, we've been in this for a long time, all of us have, and there was a moment, I think, where we believed that, kind of, if you build it, they will come, right? That, the thing that Boston really needed was a couple of really good charter schools that would show the way, and then Boston Public Schools would learn, and they would just adopt it, and we would be at the promised land. And that wasn't a terrible theory. I mean, like, that's a good, it just didn't actually happen, right? And I think when we go underneath, like, why didn't it happen, is it's just not as simple as going and visiting a thing and saying, I want to do that. And that theory, I've come to understand, and I'm one of the people that, I ran charter schools myself, like, where it was a very, like, top-down theory. That it's like, we just need to have the answer, and then we need to put the answer on top of the community, and they will do it, just like, a shipment of, antibiotics, to build on your analogy, right? And so the question of, there's not an easy answer to the scale question that sounds like put it in a box and give it to people, which is why what we have to ask ourselves is, how do we scale a process by which community by community? And as you said, that sounds exhausting. And sometimes when I'm talking to, folks about this, including funders, they're like, really? There's 130,000 schools in this country. And 13,000 districts. How's this going to happen, right? And the thing that's giving us faith is that while the build it, they will come theory doesn't work, what does work is building a sense of inspiration within a community and then very intentionally spreading those practices within it, right? So as an example, in Aldine, Texas, we've helped implement one of these models that builds belonging, et cetera, with the help of lots of people. It actually originated in DC, in a DC public school. It's called the Whole Child Model. We've helped spread that to 10 schools in Aldine, Texas, and we're seeing all those numbers go up like we talked about. But here's the magical thing that's happened. Now that we've done that, they're doing some community-based processes on high schools to move to CTE models. And they're thinking about, how do we do this for math, right? It has sparked a thing within the entire district where they're asking themselves, how do we build the capacity to be changing the way we do school forever? Well, we're not just trying to replace a 100-year model of school with a new 100-year model of school, but we're replacing it with something that's dynamic, ever learning, ever responsive to new needs, ever resourceful with new technologies, right? And that's how other sectors run. And so that's a question we're asking ourselves. How do we scale that? And it takes very deliberate action, building proof points, building the capacity in a local community. But we're starting to see it happen. And so, let's have this panel again in 5 years, and hopefully I'll have some whole district examples of this.
Well, to come to that point, sort of your question about how to scale, I would argue there's a little bit of it also hiding in plain sight. So I was one of those 15 million rural kids in the country, right? The town I grew up in had 700 people. My town didn't have they'll still exist. My town didn't have a hospital, but you know what my town had? A school. So if we think about not just the physical building for a moment, let's think about the institution of education and the power that it could have in a community. A couple of examples how that's playing out for us. We believe that to whom much is given, much is required. And so when we look at those 4,000 districts that we're partnering with now, that's trust. They don't call us in because it's a sunny day. They call us because they need help, and they trust that we can actually help them. So we at TNTB have been thinking about how do we use those partnerships that we already have all across this great nation to be a catalyst for some of this work. Two examples that I'll share where we're already seeing that play out. One is some of our work in Phoenix. We're trying to work to help parents be engaged, Latinx parents. And so what happened with that work, not only did they become more engaged and feel like they could be empowered to advocate for their children, they then themselves lined up to become educators themselves. So it turned into this like pipeline program. We're like, well, we didn't expect that, but that's where you authentically engage the community. Those are called 2-gen, multi-gen strategies, right? We know those are all effective. A different example, we actually have been working in Grand Rapids. Please don't go to Grand Rapids in December or January, just FYI. So we've been working there, partnering with the community and General Motors, trying to help them. They want to know, how can we really work with the district around STEM? Well, you know the beautiful part? We didn't go into a corner with the district, go into a separate corner with GM. We actually brought together the community to map out what was the landscape, their context, right? What was their market, and then align their programming around STEM to align with the local job market that their kids would be accessing. Birmingham, we've been on the ground now there for, I don't know, 5, 7 years, right? Birmingham, before COVID, said, they came together and said, our number one problem that we're worried about for our children, it was mental health. Now, some of the funders didn't like that. They're like, well, no, we want to fund you to do some math or literacy work. The community said, we're worried about mental health, and this was pre-COVID. We worked with that community, helped them secure funding. They stood up their own organization that is a cross-collaborative table, Empower Ed. You know what Birmingham recently got? And that same group is helping lead Good Jobs Birmingham now, right? They're experiencing phenomenal growth, and the community is at the center. And I would like to think that we played a part simply by setting the table, helping do the translation, right? We know in K-12 we talk standards and grades, and in workforce we talk skills and jobs. Do the translation, help people find common ground, what is our highest aspiration for our young people, and help figure out what role we each can play to get towards that.
Common ground, connection, community, partnership, deep engagement. I'm getting all the tenors of that. Like the recipe is actually within the community. And that what we do is like we help play a part in that partnership and integration to make sure it's relevant to them. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, we have a few minutes left. In this room, we have a community of educators, entrepreneurs, funders, different stakeholders, policymakers, and the likes. I'm going to end where I started off with this question of, in a moment in time, in an external climate, where folks are really asking the question, is it possible to still make progress? Why still stay in this? Why still commit to this? We have been well over generations trying. What would you say to our partners, our friends who are out here who are maybe just saying, like, I don't know, like, should I still keep giving in at this moment in time? What is the charge that you have to this audience and to the group of people who are listening on the video, outside, who are going to come back to this in the moment in time where they really need to have some sense of hope of why now and why still? What would you offer?
I would say two things. Number one, please resist the call to back into our corners and not be able to hold two things true. Because it is actually true that we had been making progress steadily up until about 2013. It is also true that we need to do even more, and we must do even more to continue to innovate and invest in our young people. Now is not the time to divest from our young people. It is also true that I believe that our education system's connection to the very American ideal, it's broken. That's why our children aren't engaged, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so the call that I would say is, I did a podcast this morning with Tiffany and Dr. Grant from Harvard, and we talked about research, rigor, and relevance. Those three things must go together. We must continue to innovate to find ways to help our children not just catch up, but accomplish everything that they aspire. And so when we put together that innovation, that research, rigor, and relevance, along with our moral compass and our moral aspiration as a nation, then I would just ask, how dare we even attempt to not to give up on our young people?
Yes, amen. Yes. I'll say two things. One is to build on the don't go into our corners. I think we need to also resist the politicization of schools and classrooms. You know, the divisiveness in our country is going in all sorts of directions. And it's so sad to see it in the school, right? And so some of the very understandable impulses to shut down, to not be in dialogue, are going to hurt us. And so I think that's probably a call that's even broader than just for schools, but it certainly applies. And if I were to pick just one group to talk to more, it's students. You know, a lot of times when we're working with schools, we will do just a very common practice of conduct an interview with a student for 45 minutes. There's a whole, you know, set of questions, and you only talk for 3 of the minutes. They talk for 42 of the minutes. And without exception, I've literally never talked to an educator and said, how was that? Where they haven't said 2 things. 1, I've never done that before. And 2, that was one of the most impactful things I've ever done, right? Let alone when that educator then goes and spends a day shadowing a child for an entire day. If you haven't done it, try it. And when you do that, even 2 or 3 times, let alone a dozen times, it's impossible not to believe what you said, right? That we cannot divest, right? Because our brains immediately understand that these children represent all children. They represent our children. And so that's maybe my biggest call to action is talk to the kids.
Talk to the kids. Talk to the kids. Center community. Center student voices, their perspectives, their experience. Thank you. Tequilla, Aylon, thank you for sharing your insights. And as they share, the time continues, the time is now. Have a great day, you all.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy Rochelle, and let's get serious. Now, how many of you went already to the AI show down the block a little bit? Fantastic. Well, this is that other thing. And it's not the venture capital show. No, it's the Pedagogy show. Wow. I am so excited to be in a room of people who care about how students learn and how we can best teach. And we have like the most fantastic panel here today to talk about that with you. So first, a little bit about me, and then they're going to each introduce themselves. As I said, I'm Jeremy Rochelle. I'm a researcher. I work at Digital Promise, and I'm going to let you in on a little bit of my background. I went to MIT as an undergraduate and studied computer science and thought of going into AI. But I didn't, because I realized that I found people and humanity a lot more interesting than I found computers. And I wanted to really study people and how we can help them learn. And so I have that commitment today, although AI has come back around, and it's certainly a fuller part of my life. So that's me. Dan, you say words about yourself? Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Dan Meyer. I work at Amplify, former high school math teacher. Very excited about pedagogy, and especially excited about the classroom in which pedagogy happens. You know, a lot of us in the room here probably write a lot of emails for a living, maybe. And teaching is just like that. If you were writing your emails with a marching band in your ear while inside a washer dryer tumbling around. So that's the bar at which I want to hold all of our solutions here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Holloway. I'm the Director of AI and Computer Science in Gwinnett County Public Schools. We're just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And, you know, one of my big passions, which I think we probably all share as educators, is making sure that our students are actually prepared for their future. And we're creating meaningful experiences for them with intentionality that do that. And so there's a lot of hype in education, a lot of hype around AI, a lot of buzzwords, but kind of cutting through that and figuring out what is it that our students really need and how can we leverage the resources and tools around us to do that, and the people around us to do that, because this is about people. That's something I'm really passionate about and excited to chat about today.
I'm Dylan. I do data science and AI for McGraw-Hill. And like you, actually, Jeremy, in undergrad at my school, there was a program called Symbolic Systems. And there was part of it that could be like AI-ish, but there was another part of it that could be like neuroscience and how people learn. And I thought just how people learn is so much more complex and so much more interesting than something like rocket science. I thought that's where the cool stuff is.
Right. Hi, I'm Julia Wilkowski, and I lead the Pedagogy and Learning Sciences team at Google. So my team works with multiple different features across Google products, many of whom are used by voluntary learners such as Search, YouTube, and Gemini. So my team tries to make sure that we give great learning experiences to students who come to those tools looking to learn.
Fantastic. And I want to let our audience in. Dan, you brought up the idea of a high bar. And we've got a high bar for this conversation, that we actually want to have a conversation. And we wanted to frame that. We talked about this just before. We wanted to frame our bar with a pedagogical idea, that we are different people. We have cognitive diversity here on this stage of how we think about pedagogy, how we think about school, how we think about technology. And we want to see if we can bring those ideas closer together, or at least in contact with each other, and not just like have 4 separate ideas here, but can we be like a well-functioning classroom? A well-functioning classroom benefits by the fact there are children, living, breathing children in it, and they are different people. And so how can we talk about those issues of how to use classrooms, harness that diversity as a pedagogical principle. So I hope you all hold us to that, and we're going to see how we do. So here's how we're going to start out. The idea of the session is getting serious about pedagogy, and we thought we ought to have an example. And I'm going to turn to Dylan, and maybe you could share a higher ed example for us of what it looks like for you to get serious.
Absolutely. And I take no credit for this, because this was all stuff that happened at McGraw-Hill, but I was not involved in any of this. There was a group in higher education at McGraw-Hill that was trying to figure out what might be a useful AI feature set for their college instructors. And they spitballed a bunch of ideas, and they whiteboarded some things, and there might have been Post-it notes, and then they took those ideas and they spoke with actual instructors to find out what would be helpful, what would be useful, what would be interesting, what got them excited. And of all of the ideas that they had on their list, there was this one that kind of resonated, and it was, a lot of times these instructors would have kids come to their office hours, and they would be asking essentially for a recapitulation of what the professor thought they had just covered in the lecture. But they needed it said a little bit differently. And once the instructor said it just a little bit differently, then it made sense. Then the student was like, oh, okay, now I got it. And so this idea was, for when a student is faced with a wall of text in some reading load for the week, they could highlight a passage in that text and say, can you just explain this differently for me? And that is a super useful, helpful thing for a reader who is trying to actively engage with the assignment, but is kind of stuck or blocked in some way that, you know, when I was a kid, we would go to office hours and we would like try to get support. But now, as that student is doing their active reading, they can get just a slightly different take or a slightly different framing of a particular topic and move on.
Cool. Thanks. Okay.
Can I jump in? Yeah. That actually reminds me of something that we do at Google with the LearnLM product. So LearnLM is our core model that was developed with learning science infused into it. And so when we are presenting content in Gemini, let's say a student missed a class on the cell cycle and they wanted to hear it again, or they read the textbook and they didn't quite get it, we can present information in a way that manages their cognitive load and presents information in, let's say, multi-modalities with an image next to the text. Maybe it will make a simulation for the learner. Maybe it will inspire active learning and give quizzes, or inspire metacognition and help the student reflect on their learning process. So I see a lot of similarities between what we're talking about.
Before we go to K-12, anyone else want to share an observation on Dylan's story?
I'm gonna just I'm really curious about this. I'm gonna just offer a bar for success around AI. This is mine, could be the wrong one. I don't know the product, so I'm just curious how this lines up. But when I think about success in AI, I think about maybe 3 things. Like 1, very little extra work on the part of the student or teacher to access that AI. 2, there's no cost to the social relationship with teacher or student. 3, just that the benefits are immediately apparent. And so with that said, like I hear so much I like about, for instance, the essay or the explain it one more time. It seems embedded into the workflow in a way that's like very helpful for the student. And I do wonder about the cost to the student-teacher relationship. Like part of when the student comes to the teacher and says, hey, I need it one more time, the teacher's not just gonna like then out loud and just like say some stuff. The teacher's gonna say like, okay, so where are you coming from? Okay, and make that connection, which is the core of the art of teaching. And so I hear the power, and also I feel the worry that the social cost in that relationship.
I think that's a great flag. And I really like that second one, like the cost to the relationships, because a key part of what you want to do is leverage the AI to support human relationships. So if you do have a situation in which the kids are diverting to engaging with a tool instead of engaging with a person, that would certainly be a flag.
And I think there's this huge conversation about efficiency and productivity and time saving, and yeah, like doesn't everyone want that? That's great. But at the same time, if we're jumping into that without thinking about what that cost is, that's really scary to me. We are in the business of people, right? When we talk about education, it's about relationships. We know the biggest factor on student achievement is that teacher quality, and we know that students are most engaged, right, when they have an authentic connection to what they're learning. And so how do we, I don't pretend to have the answer to this, but the question that I'm wondering, similar to you, is like, how do we take advantage of those things to save time, to focus more on the people, and not lose the people in the process of doing that?
And one thing I'm hearing from all of us is that we're good with this idea of explain it one more time, but we want to propel that in a particular direction. If it just ends there, since it's, I got it, put it in my pocket, I'm done, we're not so satisfied. We want that to lead to a classroom discussion, a discussion with a peer that now they feel prepared and they can take that next pedagogical step on that learning arc. I'm seeing lots of nods.
I think for me, one of the great powers of AI is the ability to have students engage with content in new and different ways, to be able to express their learning in ways that they might not have done before and get feedback instantly in those new ways. So I think, right, seeing content presented in an effective way is the first step, but interacting with the content, playing with those ideas, getting feedback around them, I think can be one of the next steps they can take.
Great. Well, let's pivot to K-12 because we're going to get a couple scenarios out on the table. Sally, would you help us out?
Yeah, sure. So in Gwinnett County Public Schools, we've been doing for a few years something that we call AI readiness. And it's around this idea of not thinking specifically about a tool, but thinking about what is AI doing to the world around us and how are we preparing our students for that. And so it goes back a little bit to that intentionality and the planning, right? That is part of pedagogy. And thinking about how do we create those authentic experiences for students where we are thinking about what we're doing and discussing it and reflecting on it real time, right? So if we're bringing an AI tool into the classroom, it is for a specific purpose. The teacher has been very intentional about that, and then they are bringing that to the students' attention as well about why we're using this, what does this tool do, what skills are required to have this interaction or to have this outcome that we want, and how do we continue to develop those skills. So I think, like, you know, there's a lot of pitches happening right now about, you know, just do this, right? This is going to be so simple if you just do this, whatever this is, with this tool. But I just think there's a lot of intentionality that goes behind bringing something like that into the classroom to create that meaningful experience and to continue that skill development. So what does it look like for a student 15 years from now entering into the workforce? What are they going to need to know and do? I'm not sure that that's exactly what we're teaching all the time. That's Sally's opinion. And how do we create experiences with the technology that are thinking through that lens, through workforce development, through skill development, and not about like a cool, fun game that this AI tool is going to bring into the classroom.
What I really like about what you just described was that the core focus is actually not on AI, it's on metacognition. It's on saying, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And how is what I'm doing helping me with what I want to achieve? And that's a super transferable skill. Yeah. That's absolutely what you want people to be doing 10 to 15 years from now, even if there's a totally different array of tools that they're going to be using.
I was hearing just a lot of intentionality, too. I mean, there is a lot out there for this AI thing is cool, and we've got to check it out, and let's see what it does. Let's take it for a spin. But you're really bringing us back to the teacher has some places she's trying to go with this classroom and making sure those uses are in support of that bigger goal. And the goal's not going to be completely met by the technology, right? It's an assist along that way.
Yeah, we think about teachers as designers of learning spaces. And there's a tremendous amount that goes into designing a learning space, getting the right sort of the norms in place, getting the right expectations in place, getting everybody clear about what they're doing and why, and folding tools into that as appropriate for the goals that you have as the designer of that learning space, as the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about ed tech in general, right, how many tools have we seen come through the last 15, 20 years, and how many of them truly transformed education and student outcomes? Yeah. And so I think, like, while there's such great potential with AI and what that can do for us, like, I don't think we're there yet. And I think that, again, if we are not thinking about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, what is the need that exists in your specific community and classroom before we're thinking about technology, we are missing a very huge step, and we're potentially wasting a lot of time and money on that.
Yeah, one possible diagnosis for why so much of ed tech has failed to transform anything I'll offer is that it often starts with a theory about the technology and not about the end user, the teacher, or the student. And I think we saw, like ed tech just receives so far downstream from the larger frontier models or tech providers like Google, for instance. Like we receive these tools from better capitalized industries and then say, well, what can we do with this, you know? That's very different from saying, well, what do teachers and kids actually need, and then go looking for the right tools for the job. I think that's one of the bigger problems we're having right now in this field.
And I would say that Google develops tools based on what the research that we have done and what the needs are we're hearing from students, from teachers, from learners who are just pursuing curiosity, from learners who are pursuing education. So for example, in Google Classroom, we have a number of generative AI tools that help with lesson planning, with releveling text for students who may need some extra scaffolding and support. We have tools that help generate hooks for introducing lessons to your class. So those are all needs that we heard from teachers specifically, and therefore we built those tools for them.
Yeah, companies are definitely like, there's more better and worse ways to go about this, and I can absolutely believe that you're user-centered. And I also, this is an example, I think, of where the LLM outputs text about a hook or a re-level text, and then the teacher does have so much to do, in my experience, so much to do to go from the LLM output into either, Google Slides or a handout or formatting or whatever the classroom context is, that last mile with the teachers I work with in Oakland, California, who have just zero extra bandwidth. Like it leaves a lot for them to do. And so part of whatever will be transformative will find its way into, I think, the existing environments teachers work in. Like incumbents have a disadvantage here in that they don't have the AI expertise, but they have the advantage in having a platform where people are already doing their work.
So we are talking about pedagogy, and I got from what you were saying the idea that pedagogy involves around, one part of it is establishing some classroom norms that are going to drive this classroom over the course of a year where we want to go. And so I want to ask each of you, can you think of a situation where AI broke a classroom norm in a bad way or enabled a more aspirational one to come into focus? I'm open to either. And I'll give you a quick example while you're thinking to give you a little time to think which norm you want to talk about. I did a study with an early version of AI circa 2015 and it was in West Virginia classrooms. And when we went into the West Virginia classrooms beforehand, they were intensely social places with lots of collaboration and talk and so forth going on. And then this AI came in, it was very gamified. And the kids loved it at first, to be honest, for the first half of the school year. And then they started hating it. And we had focus groups with the students, bought them some pizza, sat around with them. Why are you hating this? We miss talking to our friends. We miss so-and-so used to come talk to me about my brother and sister, and she's off in the corner helping kids in rotation now, and I don't see her. And it broke the norm of that classroom as this cohesive social unit. So that was a bad one, but it was also a while ago. We might have gotten better. So what's a norm you would like to see upheld or that you're afraid AI is breaking?
I'll just echo it as, I just want to echo that and say it's not a norm, that is a human need. And we are, like, I am so envious of your students, Julia, who are kind of opt in. Like I learn a lot from Google and YouTube, right? And the teachers and students I support are very much not opt in. They cannot opt out of their K-12 education, right? And the kids that show up at those doorsteps, they are trying to learn something about math, about content, but especially about themselves as people. And what value do I have here? And those two need to be entwined. Like a lot of people here at this conference try to separate those and say, all right, we'll do the heavy content stuff over here with the AI, the LLM, and the teacher will form relationships. But that's not how it works. Like kids need both of those at the same time. When they offer an idea about fractions, they're asking, who am I? Do you see me? Do my friends think I'm valuable? So I just want to rephrase that even more broadly, as this is a human imperative you're describing here, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm. This might be a bit of a stretch, but an example that I've seen is an AI tool that a kid could surreptitiously ask a question when they don't understand a term that's being used in a classroom conversation. There was a discussion of a short story, and a teacher asked a question about the juxtaposition of two scenes in the short story. And this girl did not know what the word juxtaposition meant. And so she was like, what does juxtaposition mean? And the system came back with a little explanation about it, and that let her back into that conversation. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can I respond to that one? I feel myself, I'm the heel here. I'm getting into my role here, folks. I'm the heel. Okay, so I just want to say one possible interpretation here is that the class ought to feel safe enough where
100%.
kids, and maybe that's not always the case for learners, but I would like to hold that as a high bar where kids
Agreed.
Can admit where they don't get it and people don't jump on them.
Agreed.
So I just want to.
No, this goes back. So Dan and I enjoy each other. This goes back to an earlier conversation we had about the difference between insisting that classrooms behave in a way that we both agree they absolutely should behave, and meeting kids where they need to be in classrooms that are nowhere near that. And there's a real risk on both sides. On the one side, if you hold everybody to this high bar and there are kids who get 0, then they're locked out. But on the other side, if you let kids settle for something that's like a little more impoverished than just raising your hand and be like, I'm sorry, what is juxtaposition? And then the teacher gets a really cool, vibrant discussion about that word, and maybe 6 other kids who didn't even realize that they didn't even tracking well enough to know that they could ask. So there's like, yes, absolutely, but at what point is something that's a little bit better worth doing, and at what point is it dangerously settling, you know? And it's like selling ourselves short.
Yeah.
That's an open question, and I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, and I think like there's, back to your point of like there's one or the other. So 2 stories I've heard recently from some classrooms in our district. A teacher found a great auto-grade tool for something that students were using, had the students go to that tool, enter in their work. The teacher was sitting at their desk with a couple of students kind of working with them, and then asked each kid to get their feedback from the AI tool, bring it up to the teacher, enter their grade, whatever. So great, saved a lot of time for that teacher. But there was no conversation between those other students outside of the couple that were sitting with them, right, about their skills on that task, the feedback, the things that they might need to work on. And you should know your students, right? You should know, like, hey, I know this is something you've really been working on, and even though you didn't quite get there, there was still growth, right? And the AI probably couldn't acknowledge that in that moment. Versus another teacher who still pulling small groups of students, but all students get the opportunity to come to that small group moment, and they're still using an AI tool to help them get feedback on their work, but the teacher is kind of co-coaching with that tool and the student. And so it's a collaborative conversation, and it saves the teacher a little bit of time still, and the focus of their time now in the classroom is in conversation with their students. And so they can speak to those things. And so sort of the same idea of giving feedback and saving time on giving that feedback, but again, going back to intentionality and those teacher moves that are really important, that those are just 2 totally different experiences for students and the relationship that they're developing with their teacher.
And going back to your question, Jeremy, about some of the norms or things that we think that AI can enhance or opportunities for AI. And it kind of ties together a lot of the conversation that was just happening. But when I was teaching 6th grade, I found it really difficult to manage group work. So I think we all know that students learn really well when they're discussing and working towards a common goal, but it's impossible for any one teacher to have ears on all the groups that are happening simultaneously. But what if you had an AI that was listening to those group conversations and was able to intervene when they went off track? What if they were able to give personal feedback to each member of the team on their collaboration and communication skills? I think that would have been an amazing tool. I don't think that it exists out there yet, but maybe someday that, like, it feels like that is a need that teachers have that AI can help fulfill.
And this is where my red flag raises a little bit, because I love the idea, right, of that efficiency and being able to be in all places at once as the teacher. But I'm also like, ooh, data privacy, like that makes me feel a little icky about the fact that AI is going to be listening, recording, maybe even using this data. And that's the reality, right? We know that it requires data, but I think there is a big question of how much are we okay with that? And at what point do students and parents and teachers have agency to say yes or no in those situations? Because while this is quickly evolving and there's so much opportunity and so much excitement around it, there's also a lot of uncertainty. And I think we need to allow people to kind of grapple with that and be able to make some decisions for what they're okay with.
Yep. And this is an implementation detail, but the LLMs as they exist today are intrinsically biased because of the training that they had. So I would be really worried that kids who are engaging in a super rich conversation in a particular dialect would get dinged in ways that if the teacher isn't there firsthand to observe, they might miss.
My suspicion, knowing kids, living with kids in my home, is that we would see new frontiers in the field of AI bullying by those groups of kids. Like had never before seen an AI cry, but we would see that happen. Like, I mean, it's an instinct. It's this little box you can poke at it, and it does stuff. And I'd love to believe that the kids would only interact with it in pro-social ways. But it really is that human relationship with the teacher and your classmates that like puts a handbrake on some of a kid's worst impulses and encourages them to be more pro-social. I think it's an open question what the group of kids would do with that little puck on their desk. But I worry about the puck. I do.
And so Julia brought up the scenario of supporting the small groups and then maybe the teacher getting a report of misconceptions. And we were all talking about some things we saw over at the AI show that had a little bit of those properties. And yet, Dan, you were critical about when you said, oh, it's just putting it in buckets. It's not really what a teacher needs. So I just want to draw that out for the audience here. Like, it seems like it can work, and that one, by the way, well, it did actually capture kids' voice, so it could have the privacy problem. But yeah, it was a math tool. I'll say what it was, Snorkel, and I liked it. It was listening to kids talk about a math problem and getting a sense of some of the concepts that were in play. Some might be misconceptions. And then it was trying to help the teacher with that. But you felt it didn't quite meet the mark.
I loved a few things about it. One, that it captured rich data from student math thinking beyond multiple choice A, B, C, D. It had like your hand drawings on a problem. That's rich data. It's high resolution. It had voice data. I'm into it, barring privacy concerns. One thing I found interesting about it was that it offered an insight tab for teachers. Is Snorkel John in the room? I got to be careful here. I love you, Snorkel John. But it had
we both really like the product.
Yeah,
we're saying this in the nicest way.
This is high praise. We're talking about it. And it had an insights tab that would tell the teacher, several misconceptions kids had about the math and which kids had it. Which, if you have a certain conception of teaching as the act of writing information to little databases called students, like, that makes a lot of sense. If you have the idea that teaching is like laptop work, but inside of a school, that makes sense. But if you understand teaching as like just being thrown inside of a clothes dryer with a marching band outside your ear, it's like, what am I going to do with this? I watched a teacher last week who was starting a class while texting about a kid who had ran off. And later, she was facilitating the debrief on the lesson at the door while talking outside the door to the principal about the kid who had run off. Like, you cannot believe what it's like if you've never done it. And so the idea that I would process, there's 5 students, there's 1 student in 5 categories. What do I do with that, It's a theoretical idea that I see so often in this space that does not respect the reality of teaching in classrooms. I want that turned into the next step. Like, give me action, not insights. Teachers do not need more of your insights. Give me the next action to do.
Yeah. What I hear as consistent across those is that the scarce resource we're trying to support is the teacher's attention. Mm-hmm. And what you're describing is like, I can't possibly be in all those conversations, but man, I wish I could, because there's probably something rich going on here, and here. And here it's the same thing. It's like, my attention is already fractured. You can't ask for so much more of it.
So maybe it's not time we want to save or efficiency for the teacher, it's attention. Does the world look different if we focus on the teacher's attention?
Well, and all of this is making me think about teacher training and support and what this is going to require for them to be able to do all of those things that you're talking about and still be an effective teacher. Mm-hmm. We are seeing, at least in Gwinnett, we have 183,000 students. We're a large district, tons of teachers. And we are seeing a huge increase in career changers coming in as teachers. Great, they bring a lot of expertise. But they're not coming in as classically trained educators. And so how you onboard them and support them is very different. And so when you're thinking about taking a teacher who's experienced, who maybe was classically trained, and how do you get them to do the things that you're talking about and have, shifts in practice around using these AI tools, that's totally different when you're still just trying to get some very basic teacher pedagogy, classroom norms, relationships in place for those teachers who don't have them yet. And so I think as I'm observing the teachers that we support, often those are the teachers who are the most enticed into making some of those, I'm going to call them mistakes, about using AI in really inauthentic or lacking human interaction ways, is because they don't know the value of that yet, right? They don't know what those teacher moves are. And so for me, that's a fear of mine, is how do we hold all of these things as valuable and make sure that our teachers and students, no matter where they're coming into this at, are getting the information they need to do that, because that's a real thing, right? Like, when a teacher closes their door, whatever's happening in their classroom is them, right? Them and their students. And so how are we equipping them to be able to manage that and make sure that, again, we know that teacher quality is the biggest impact on our student outcomes. So it's a much bigger conversation than just AI, for sure.
Yeah. So how do we work, being serious about pedagogy, means there isn't just one that's perfect for every teacher where they are in their career development, that there's maybe a pedagogical ladder that they're going to work with, or pedagogical growth. And so getting serious means supporting a bunch of pedagogies with your AI. Yeah.
And even to draw that out further, I think it means supporting teachers as being on a learning journey themselves.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the vision we were talking about the classroom. I opened my remarks with this. It kind of came up in what you said, Dan. Like, the teacher doesn't want to pigeonhole each individual kid into a cell and treat that kid necessarily. They want to work with the classroom, and they want this classroom to go somewhere amazing together. But a requirement in that is the classroom is full of learners with differences, learner variability. So I want to draw each of you out a little bit about how can we be doing a better job of having cohesive classrooms that support learner variability.
Yeah, it's been one of the biggest flaws of the last 15 years in ed tech that we have had this idea that every learner is just so different as to need to be separate from one another, that we should personalize their learning, have them on laptops separately. There's a lot of good theory there, but it does just absolutely crater the social environment of the classroom, to your point earlier, Jeremy. So yeah, acknowledging that the class is full of variability. Kids come with different ideas. What do teachers do with that? And the first challenge is to draw that out of the kids. Like, the worst teachers you've ever had are the ones that just assume that you're all in the same space, that you're all mini versions of me. And if I talk to you like I would talk to me, like a younger version of me, then you'll learn. But no, like, we got to draw that out of kids. And that takes, in our work, curriculum, like good curriculum with good teachers, growing teachers, that draws ideas out, random ideas, wild ideas, ideas in different languages, ideas that are concrete, abstract, all the way through. And then here, I've not seen an AI tool that supports with that very key task. Like, an LLM output is not going to spark a kid's imagination and desire to share. Humans do that. But then there's the hard thing is all these ideas are now out on the table. In an ideal world, all these ideas are out on the table to work with. That presents the teacher a serious challenge, which is, what do I do with all these ideas? And so here again, I just want to say, where I get most...
But a good challenge, Dan.
It's a good challenge.
If they are working with student ideas,
yes,
we've moved the needle.
A necessary challenge. This is necessary for good
right?
pedagogy, yes. And this is where I get a little bit excited. My blood pressure goes up a little bit about AI.
In a good way.
In a good way. In a healthy way. Healthy parameters, okay? But excited. And that is that when I have fed into our local LLM and Amplify, fed in 30 text responses to the question, why do two odd numbers add up to an even number? And these 30 responses are all just like wacky kid speak, you know, ranging from IDK on up to some fairly like formal responses, that I can ask the LLM to pull out themes for me and suggest, using our prompt engineering, a next question. Or to pull out exemplars and suggest the teacher ask the kids, how are these the same? How are they different? Like, to have that pedagogical next step for making good use of learner variability while preserving the social relationship, that's it. That's what I need.
Dylan, you going to build it?
Yes.
Julia, you going to build it?
Absolutely.
And if they build it, Sally, will you buy it?
Yeah, let's go.
Race ya, you too.
Well, as we wrap up, I just want to give you each a chance to say a last word about your work, what you'd like to carry on this conversation with our audience with. They can meet you out in the hall. So anything you want to say as we wrap up this session. Julia, you want to go first?
Sure. So I think we hear a lot about AI is transforming learning. And I think we want to be really careful about how we think about that. As a neuroscientist by training, I believe that the fundamental process by which we learn, that is, we are storing and organizing information in our brains and we're retrieving it in novel situations, that is not changing. What we are excited about is the way that we can open up lots of new pathways for those learning journeys, like I mentioned before, lots of ways of interacting with content, students expressing their curiosity, getting motivated and inspired to turn that curiosity into action, making their lives, their communities' lives, and the world a better place.
That's a great neuroscientific perspective on learning. There is also a sociocultural perspective on learning, which is that it's intrinsically a social process, and that's not changing either. And there have been people who have said they're going to disrupt education, they're going to transform this, that, and the other thing for like so long, like at least 100 years. and they never have. But there are really cool things to get excited about. And there are new affordances that open up possibilities that would have been infeasible even 4 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So there is tremendous amount of cool stuff that can be done, but we gotta be super humble, and we gotta start with what is the actual learning goal rather than what does the technology make achievable.
So I'm going to speak to the educators in the room for a second, and this is my soapbox, but if you're talking about AI implementation without talking about AI literacy, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle here. And I mean AI literacy for your students all the way up to your superintendent, because you cannot be a responsible user, decision maker, if you don't understand how it works, if you don't know the right questions to ask, if you can't think, is this a good use of this tool? And so be mindful of strategy. How is this aligned to the needs that exist for your students in your classroom and in your community? And have those conversations. And then to the vendors in the room, if you can't help schools align to their vision, to their needs, if you can't help them connect those things, you're missing a part of that too. And so I think there's a lot of cool stuff we've talked about. I think we're all a little bit wary of the hype, cautiously optimistic, I'll say. But that's an important part that I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about, and I really think it's missing from the conversation.
I'll offer to the vendors, myself included, get serious, I think, means for me, I'll know you're serious if I know when you were last in the classroom as an observer, as just a tutor of some kids in the classroom who needed extra support, as the teacher of record, like offering to teach a lesson. I know that I have been a teacher. I'm a high-capacity teacher. I still don't sleep the night before I have volunteered to go in and teach a lesson. Like, I'm thinking about all the ways our product might break down. I'm worried in a new way, and that's how I'll know you're serious. Like, teaching is not blue-collar work. It is not white-collar work. It is not social work. It is all three kinds of work, and you got to know that. You got to know that.
I love that, Dan. Thank you all. And I want to say, I'm Jeremy Rochelle. If by the strange chance you have enjoyed listening to my voice, I do a podcast these days with my colleague, Betsy Corcoran.
Plug it.
And you could hear me more. Dan's been a guest. We'll have to get the rest of you on. Anyway, let's close with a round of applause for Dan, Sally, Dylan, and Julia. Thank you so much.
Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. The program will begin shortly. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Check, check. There we go. So apologies for my delightful Australian accent. We can put on Microsoft Translator or something to help you out if you're struggling. Otherwise, I'll try to speak slowly. The topic here for this panel is about security, defending, protecting, and reflecting. And we know that schools are facing an unprecedented assault on their services at the moment. They not only disrupt learning, but also daily operations and compromise both security and privacy of incredibly sensitive information about students. It's often not a priority for schools and districts around the globe unless they've been targeted. Then it's their number one priority, and it's all they care about. Think about this, 2,500 cyber attacks per week in universities. That represents 43% of all universities. That's every week. In Q2, quarter two of 2024, education was the third most targeted industry for cyber attacks. 15,000 messages with malicious code are sent to education sector every day. Cybercrime, if you think about that as a GDP, and I'm sure you've heard this statistic, if cybercrime was a gross domestic product, it would be the third largest nation behind China and the US, just in terms of its $4 trillion revenue base, making it big business with schools as a target. The topic here at ASU+GSV is learning at the speed of light. I'd say there's a subtitle there, which is innovation at the speed of security, which is what we're going to pick up with my esteemed colleagues here. So joining me, we have AJ Phillips from Prince William School. We have Lester Godsey from Arizona State University. My good friend Stephen Whiffen joining us from Coquitlam Schools in BC. Dr. Peter Maharaj from San Diego Community College. I'm Mark Sparvel. I'm from Microsoft. I'm a Director of Education over there. What I'm going to do to start off with is ask these fine people who come from very different contexts to do a brief introduction of themselves, their role, and also what it is about their perspective they're going to bring to this conversation about security. Let's kick it off with you, AJ.
Hi, I'm AJ Phillips. I'm the Director of Information and Instructional Technology for Prince William County Schools in Manassas, Virginia. That's right outside of DC. If you've ever been there, you're always stuck in traffic, so you probably enjoy it. Prince William County is the second largest school district in the state. We are the 32nd largest in the nation. And it's a shame, like the last session I was in, this place was packed. It's sad to me that it's not packed right now, because AI is great until it's not, and it's not protecting our students. So at the end of the day, my core business, my perspective I'm bringing today is my job is to protect our babies. All day long, that's what I need to do. And so AI, like I said, we want to use it, and we think it's exciting, and it is, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure our kids are safe and they understand how to use it safely. And so part of that perspective is what I'm going to bring to you today.
Thanks, AJ. Let's jump to you, Lester.
Sure. Lester Godsey, Chief Information Security Officer for Arizona State University. Just by way of context, I just passed my 4-month mark as the CISO for ASU. Prior to that, and this might come out from my perspective, prior to that I was the CISO for Maricopa County, so that name probably sounds familiar to everybody. So I had to deal with the 2020 and 2024 elections here in the US. So, and I think one of the things that I think will come across from my participation is that the use of AI really highlights and exacerbates the problems that our industries have had, regardless of higher ed or any other sort of vertical, in particular with respect to the basics. So treating data as an asset, understanding where your assets are within your organization. And so now AI poses yet another challenge and potential risk to organizations across the board, regardless of sector.
Thanks for those comments. Stephen.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Whiffen. I'm Assistant Superintendent and CIO in Coquitlam School District, which is Metro Vancouver, Canada. So I think I'm just about the only Canadian I've seen here today so far. I don't know. Oh, a couple at the back. Good, nice. We're a large district, certainly by Canadian standards, not as big as Prince William County, but with about 35,000 students and approximately 5,000 staff. There's a really large user base, 80 sites, a lot of complexity. Oh yeah, and our budget's really small. And so within that context, I think one of the perspectives I bring is how we have to leverage partnerships and the work that we do with outside expertise that we bring in to help us reduce complexity, meet our data needs, and innovate around data, but doing so in a way that keeps everybody safe.
Thanks for those comments. We've organised this conversation around detecting, protecting and reflecting, and the first part is just an open question to the panel, which is, when you think about the detection of threats within your institution, your organisation, what are you detecting? How are you going about it? What are you using? So what does this kind of threat and risk management look like? Anybody?
I'll go ahead. So in Prince William, we have thousands of endpoints, right? And so just in the past year, we've stopped 93.5 million phishing attacks. Education is prime for the picking, right? They are after our data, our kids' data, our staff data. So what are we doing? Well, the use of AI is beneficial for my small information security team, and that we are using that to prevent those attacks from getting any further, right? And so we've enabled some of our products, some of those AI features internally, and it's making us be more efficient, not only in stopping those attacks, but before it was a lot of manual labor of deleting those phishing emails from that account and going here and going there. Instead, we were using the AI resources to move quickly and more efficiently to stop people from opening that email and clicking on it.
Great. So intervening early. I like that. And so it's automated with AI.
Exactly.
Great. What about somebody else on the panel? What are you detecting and how are you going about addressing that?
So I'll put maybe a different spin on this, and I would encourage those in our audience to stop by the ASU booth for more information. But so one of the things that we've done is we've built our own custom bespoke AI platform environment. And in particular, one of the things, it's not rolled out yet in full production, but we're actively testing right now, is we're testing the detection of the use of our bespoke environment for certain sorts of activities like jailbreaking or use of, currently right now in our My AI Builder is what we call it. We support 53 large language models, open source as well as private. But we've developed tests that we're in the process of testing for jailbreaking activities, for ability to use those platforms to create malicious payloads such as ransomware and things of that sort. We're also in the process of testing for and putting form and structure around things like, what if somebody's prompting to do self-harm or harming others, that sort of thing. And so AI is really, and again, this goes back to the basics where these are the sort of things that we were looking for, through traditional methods or other platforms or vehicles such as social media for threats. Now we have to be concerned as higher education in particular, given our audience, the use of AI and detecting those sorts of threats as well. So I agree. We're also looking at AI for helping us and augmenting our staff, but at the same time, it is a potential threat vector along those lines. So what are we collectively doing to detect that sort of threat?
Stephen. Yeah, so one of the things I really wanted to talk about in this regard is the sort of approach to infrastructure that we take, and then how that becomes an element to be leveraged to help you use these tools for security. So we really our data sets really started to change when we adopted Power Apps to automate a lot of our processes, including educational processes in recent years. And it produced a lot of new data, new and novel data we haven't had before, and where the inner relationships between those data sets are quite complex. Also, there's a lot of, it's the type of thing that keeps you up at night, having so much of that type of data. So for us, we were really keen to unify our data environment into a single location and leverage a common less complex set of tools to help our staff navigate the security and keep that fortified. So we, as part of that move, centralized everything under the Fabric environment. And so by getting all of our data into that one place, it's allowing us to leverage the suite of tools, including AI tools that are coming forward, to continually monitor that data, apply Copilot security, for example, but also be ready to apply Copilot analytics on it so that we can learn from that data that we now have.
And what about you, Peter?
First off, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Maharaj, the Associate Vice Chancellor of Technology Services here for San Diego Community College. I know it's 4 p.m. Mark, it's okay. San Diego Community College is one of the big three in California. We support 100,000 students, and we have 6,000 employees, and we are part of a system of 73 districts in California that are supporting 2 million students throughout the state. Our integration of AI services and the use of AI is actually built on a software stack that we've implemented and worked with quite a lot on the level of data protection, user protection, and ensuring that we have business continuity throughout our environment. So, for instance, we use Copilot quite a bit on the administrative backend. We look at that for integration of that within Defender. We use Sentinel. We have a SOC that's providing services. We also use Radware for protection of DDoS attacks against our district. Thinking about it, you know, the example was provided here, or I should say from Mark, regards to the resources and the assets of a district or university. It's quite large. You know, at Holland ransomware, it's a big attack on these vectors. So it's important to not only have the tools, but also being able to triangulate and utilize those tools in an effective manner that we can respond to these problems very promptly.
Great, thanks for that, and apologies. See, I could have sworn I asked for you to introduce yourself. I must have been hallucinating. It's not just AI that has that feature. Apparently Australian ex-educators too. Some really interesting things in there. Let me just quickly check. Lester, were you saying that you intentionally pressure test your systems? Do you employ hackers to try to hack into your own system to expose vulnerabilities?
So we don't have a bounty program or anything of that sort, but we do have staff internally that are specifically have experience and trained to do that. In the previous example, all 53 models that we currently support right now, every single one of them have gone through, or let me step back. So the security controls in place, testing for, you know, whether they could be jailbroken, whether or not they can be prompted to, you know, create malicious payloads, or can you escalate privilege, things of that sort. That's actively being tested. It's not operationalized. The other aspect of what we do have that is operationalized that has been applied to all 53 models is this custom AI ethics engine. And so it's an interesting intersection between cybersecurity and then ethics, you know, which may or may not, depending on your organization, have information security involved. But we're also looking at things like, is your model susceptible to bias? And so we use a variety of different sources of data and different tests along those lines that are automated, and we'll look for things like, for example, provide a scenario where two business individuals are in a room, one's a male, one's a female, which one's the CEO? And the only appropriate response should be not enough information to make that determination. And so we run all of those through those sort of tests. And so that's already been in place, that's already in effect for the organization, and then we're adding to that more traditional cybersecurity related stress tests, if you will, along those lines. That should be rolled out here pretty soon.
It's interesting. Peter, you mentioned SOC. So talk about the Security Operations Center operating out there at San Diego Community College, its function that it performs. Talk us a bit more through that.
Sure. So it's exactly what it says. I mean, it's a security operations center that allows us to have visibility into the network 24/7. We're able to get, you know, the levels of the threat detection that's affecting our district operations. So phishing, of course, you know, individuals that are clicking on you know, illicit links or stuff that's affecting our ERP, we are Oracle Shop. So there are definitely deep insights that we get that is much more effective with joining the tool Sentinel from Microsoft also as a SIM for the identification of attacks that are coming in, allowing us to actually resolve some of these issues in a much quicker way, say 24 months ago when we first implemented this, or before that. It was very difficult. We always were chasing some of these problems.
It seemed to be that years ago that the IT department held the domain of security for schools and institutions. And it feels like it's everybody's business now. So, and we know that hackers aren't hacking in, they're logging in, and it's pointless having an armored vehicle if you've left the doors unlocked. So, AJ, I'm curious around capacity building, what you think about that at Prince William, you know, tied in with security as everybody's business.
Yeah, so we have a multi-layered approach, and we start from the very beginning with the device that every student, every teacher has, right? We have an MDM in place. We use Intune. We also implement Purview, Defender. We have Sentinel-1, and we have Bark at the highest level for our students, using that AI to protect them and help them for, you know, suicide, bullying, those kinds of things. And so it is everybody's business. Our weakest link are humans, right? Because they're the ones reading, they're clicking because they don't understand. And so we have to do our best to set the technology up to protect them the best way that we can. And so 9 times out of 10, our kids know the phishing more than our staff do, but that's okay, right? They're all there to learn together. But those are some of the strategies that we try to put into place. It's everybody's job, right? And it's also, teachers say to me all the time, well, I saw this at a cool conference and I want to use this app. That's like my worst nightmare, right? Like, I'm like, great, they're stealing our kids' data, you're putting everything in there, and AI just put it in the largest language model in the whole world, right? But I get it. I was that teacher, right? I was the one setting stuff up on the network that the former director of technology knew nothing about, right? But we have to, it's everybody's business. And it's my job to help our staff and students understand that I need their help to better secure us.
Right. Could you pick up a similar thread, Stephen?
Yeah. And, you know, I have to agree, it's everybody's business, but sometimes it's really hard to convince a person who's actually, you know, in terms of the work they do, a power information user who doesn't think they're an information user, right? And convenience often rules the day. And no matter how much you remind people of how we have to be in it together and have that responsibility, they find it very challenging in the ebb and flow and pressure of the day when they're in front of children and having to respond to that. So you do need tools that help detect where things are going wrong. And so these tools playing a role as triage in that is extremely important. Phishing analytics, thousands of alerts that we get each day. We don't have enough people now to sit down and look at all those alerts. Having AI do triage for us is simply not just making us more efficient, it's making it possible, right? And same thing with, I think one of the ways that's helped us the most at this point is in information protection. Because we are, you know, and we've been proactive. We've put sensitivity labels in place in our organization. That's been helpful. But people overshare all the time. And having tools that detect that oversharing and send off alerts not only helps you cut off that oversharing, but it's a hugely valuable educational tool for the people that do that oversharing when they get the call and say, hey, you're doing something wrong here. So.
I think when I visited Coquitlam School, it was one of the messages that came through and stuck with me was the importance of that kind of data management and that allocation of sensitivity labels for everybody to know that. So that when a student or somebody else was doing a broad search across their entire kind of instance for grades, they're not going to get the, you know, year 11 teacher's entire grade book, which can happen, right? I'm going to share a very quick Australian story, not to do with technology, but AJ reminded me of it just then when she talked about enthusiastic people with good intentions bringing things in. History lesson, I am an ex-educator. In 1857, a farmer in Brisbane, Queensland, felt he'd like Queensland to be a little bit more like Britain. So he bought 24 breeding rabbits along to release to his property. And they loved it. They loved it big time. In fact, we have 200 million rabbits in Australia. And if you look up the rabbit-proof fence, it can be seen from space. And in fact, today, if you have a pet rabbit and you're caught in Brisbane, Australia, it's about a $46,000 fine for you to have that rabbit. They brought the rabbits over with good intent, but they had no idea what might happen next. They couldn't have imagined because it was outside of the scope of their experience. And you reminded me, AJ, of that. You made me think about my rabbit story and you gave me a perfect segue. I'll be forever grateful, thank you.
At the 3,000 apps I'm looking at that I know they're not approved that are using our district, that's how I feel.
Right, that is scary. Here's a question that I want to ask you, Lester. Obviously, I work for Microsoft. We've heard a lot about Microsoft sort of tools that are being used. Microsoft, apart from building M365 and Surface and all of that stuff, is the world's largest cybersecurity company. You know, we analyze 4 trillion signals each and every day. I found out the other day that before the Ukraine knew that they were going to be subject to an invasion, Microsoft knew beforehand because of those 4 trillion signals and got on the phone to NATO and Ukraine to say, we think something's going to happen because we're detecting all of these attacks looming. So Microsoft and security is, as the world's largest security company, is a good thing for us in education to have sitting beneath our work. But it's not a commercial break for us. What I want to ask you, Lester, is generally, how can EdTech companies, whether it's like Microsoft or any EdTech company, how can they best support universities in their approach? What works best?
So that's a great question. And so I think ed tech companies can best support higher ed by understanding the complexity of the environment and some of the challenges. And so I started off my career at ASU. I'm not going to say how long ago it was because then everybody in this room can do math. But I will say that coming back to ASU, one of the biggest challenges is even coming from Maricopa County by population as the 4th largest county in the US, the complexity of the compliance landscape and then just the organization as a whole is challenging unto itself. That coupled with the focus on research, and I think that's one of the big delineations. So if you're an ed tech company wanting to be supportive from an information security perspective of higher ed, is understanding what those challenges are and partnering with us along those lines. Because as big as ASU is, we have our own challenges, you know, and some basic blocking and tackling, which I'm working towards along those lines. But providing real support and understanding about where our priorities are in particular. And I will say this, and this is not necessarily unique to higher ed, I think every sector can resonate with this, is more often than not, the technology is not the problem. You know, it's the process, the workflow, the adoption of, you know, security controls in particular. And so I think, and I bring that up because oftentimes technology companies want to fit a, you know, a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, and it just doesn't always work. So I think being collaborative along those lines and understanding what the dynamics and challenges are would go a long way.
Thanks for that. Peter, talk a little bit about, when I'm having conversations with people about AI, we invariably end up talking about 2 things. We talk about cloud and we talk about security. We talk about migrating workloads to the cloud for various reasons. We talk about then cloud and security. So I just wonder whether you could just noodle on that beautiful little unholy triad of AI, security, and cloud migration in your perspective.
Sure, Mark. First off, you know, the democratization of the technology itself lends itself. There's definitely a benefit across the board for the use of different types of applications. But it comes with challenges that you're hearing from the other panelists here, that, you know, when we open up these things, you know, the security that goes along with that, the exposure of data, making sure that it exists within a particular platform that has the compliance requirements is very important. It keeps me at least very busy on trying to analyze every one of these contracts that are coming in. Where is this data going to be existent? Is it going to be existent in someone's server? Is it going to be existent on a cloud environment? And what security measures are going to be followed? Is there a RAG that's going to be applied to that as well? Are these third-party companies using our data to train their models? So it presents a whole heap of challenges for us. And that's the ongoing, again, the ongoing task of addressing these problems of the platforms, the vendors that we're partnering with, and making sure that we first off, I should have started this with first, what problem are we trying to solve? Get into that root cause of the problem. Then bring in a vendor, ed tech company that can provide a solution, a service that it's basically getting back to basics on a solution that we can work on and addressing a bigger problem that either a district, university, or K-12 is addressing or needing some assistance with.
Okay, thanks. AJ, I want you to talk a little bit about the role of policy at Prince William, how you've approached it. One of the, I'm on an AI advisory board for the Mid-Pacific, and one of their first things was trying to work out what they should do first. Should I tackle infrastructure first? Should I tackle, our organization of our data estate? Should I tackle the student devices first and make sure they're all, what shall we start with? Tell us a bit about policy and its role at Prince William.
Yeah, so, our first goal was ensuring we had safe network, right? That's where we got to be safe. And I think from there, it just kind of falls naturally. But even as safe as I feel our network is, we have those wonderful students who like to be courageous and adventurous, and they like to get around that network once in a while. And so, yes, we do have policies and regulations in place, and if you do something wrong, you're held accountable for it. But when I have a student, a high school student, a middle school student, even a fifth grader, get around our system, they're not in trouble. It's more of, let's sit down. Explain to me how you did that. Oh, okay, I didn't know you could do that. Thank you for showing me that. Because now we're at a point where I need to flip the switch for the student to become that ethical hacker, right? I need them to know, hey, that's not okay to do that. You broke a rule, you broke a policy, but we can turn this around and we can make it good. And so that's kind of that lesson of I'm protecting them, we're showing them, hey, you can't do that, but how did you do that? And let's do this differently, and how can we make this positive? So that's something we try to focus on, and I've met with numerous high school students, especially we have 2 IT programs that have quite a unique set to get around our network sometimes.
Sounds like constant pressure testing for your system.
They're very good testers, and I have hired actually a couple of them.
I love the way you spun it as desirable entrepreneurship. I thought there's a pragmatic optimist in the house. Thank you for that. Stephen, how about you reflecting on Coquitlam, particularly around policy or governance? What are some of the key areas that you've been working on to enable you to have the success that you've had in terms of creating a safe working environment?
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier, we've been really focused on information management in general. And so one of the things that I think is really important is engaging in policy training for staff in coordination with the introduction of new technology. So we have a wonderful opportunity right now with the emergence of AI to actually leverage that adoption of new technology. There's excitement about it, there's fear about it, there's a need for people to learn about it. And if we align our policy work that we do with that transition that's happening in practice, it creates a wonderful chance for us to reinforce policy elements that maybe people weren't as sharp on as they should have been, or haven't paid as much attention to. But you need a bit of shake-up sometimes for the policy to really sink in. And so when we talk about things like staff being in the habit of just going to a conference and being introduced something and wanting to use it the next day, I think what's come out of some of these bigger changes recently is a willingness to process this notion that actually we need to analyze that for privacy, because the privacy matters, and if you make mistakes with it, it actually could have consequences. And I think the emergence of these new technologies are helping promote the awareness of that.
innovation at the speed of security. Again, I like that because we don't want to curb people's enthusiasm, but we also can't introduce risk. Back in the 17th century, it was understood that a witch could not step across your threshold unless invited. So a witch had no power over you, or your house couldn't enter it unless you invited it across the threshold. They can be very tricky. And I think about that a lot with tools that I see online that are constantly begging to be invited in across your threshold. And it's our point to stop and ask the questions around: how is the data being gathered? Where is it being stored? How is it being used? Who can access it? How is it being disposed of? Those are key questions. If people can't answer those based upon an app or a AI tool that they've come across, if those questions can't be answered, it must be a no. Let's just pick up that question. I want us just to go across to anybody. This whole, how do you balance between, if I pick up AJ's point, trying to foster a culture of innovation at the speed of security? How do you kind of navigate the people you work with who are very enthusiastic in ways that bring risk management in without us all being seen to be the grumpy naysayer? Let's start with you down at the end. Lester?
Sure, yeah, but you hit the nail on the head from my perspective. And so information security, not everybody understands that, but everybody understands the concept of risk, right? And so everything we do on a daily basis fundamentally is in large part based off of risk. And so I had this conversation earlier, so for those of you who have had the pleasure of talking or meeting Dr. Crow, the president of ASU, you know, one thing that I'm never gonna do is say, no, you can't do that, President Crow, because then I'll be hitting one of you up for a job, right? And so, but that's not information security's role. Our role is to enable the organization to accomplish its, you know, its objectives, but in a secure fashion. And part of that basically involves being able to put things in the context of risk and explain there's consequences, right? And if I'm really on my A game, hopefully I'll have a compensating or mitigating control or a 3 in my hip pocket where I could then say, if you want to do this, here's my recommendations on reducing the risk down to a level that I believe is acceptable to the organization. But then the other aspect of that is, as a CISO for ASU, Maricopa County, or other positions I've held, I cannot accept risk on behalf of the organization, right? And so that's a decision that needs to be made by management. And so how do you affect and create that environment? And going back to you know, the topic of governance, right? And so that's why governance is so important from my perspective, that you have to have the framework in place so you can have those conversations and enable the business decision makers to make those decisions along those lines. And so just real quick, so one example of that practically in my 4-month tenure is ASU's decision on whether we would support the implementation of DeepSeek. So long story short, we put a framework in place where we could, in very limited controlled fashion based off of our environment, if there was a legitimate research need to implement DeepSeek, we would be able to do that in our walled garden custom bespoke environment. But and so because we have confidence that we can control the ingress, egress of data, et cetera, right? So instead of just taking a position of no, which a lot of organizations have done, and in some instances, if you have limited resources, I understand that. But we try to always take a position where we want to enable the organization to be innovative and move at the speed of security. But in our instance, we want that security to be a little bit faster than what would traditionally be the case.
It's a balancing act, right? I mean, we can't be Fort Knox, but we can't be the Wild West. And so from higher ed down to pre-K through 12, it's the same problem. We don't want to be the office of no, right? But it's our job to keep people safe.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important to emphasize here is in a context like ours is the importance of simplicity. I think when you get to the higher ed environments, this simplicity gets complicated really quickly. But for us, we've really leveraged notions of standardized approaches to doing things. I mentioned how we've really brought together our data set to get into a single environment. And in doing so, the argument for me there is that you get to also start to make those discussions about risk a little more accessible for people, because you can explain, this is the environment we have, these are the constraints of this environment, and here's the challenges that may come with things that we want to do off of that environment. And if we look to increase complexity, then here's the risk associated with that. And so for us, because of the resources that we have in K-12 to be able to support this, we've really erred on the side of choosing to reduce complexity. Now, at any time, in order to do things, you may have to take steps into more complicated areas. So our focus has been working in an environment that allows us to, within a unified environment, do as much as we need to do as possible. And I think the decisions we've made around the Microsoft suite of products has really helped us with that. But being able to simplify that conversation is almost as important as simplifying the environment that it is that you're trying to control.
Good comments. As we move towards our wrap-up, I'm going to start with Peter. We're going to move, we've done the detecting, protecting. This will be the reflecting part, wrapping it up at the end. And this is really just an open-ended question on what you want to leave us with. Forward thinking, novel approaches, maybe you're employing students, maybe you're doing something that hasn't been done before, surprising insights, or even your next steps. It's up to you to give us a little bit of a reflection upon where you're at and where you might be. So let's start with you.
Sure. So at San Diego, we've created a Department of Innovation, and I have a colleague here in the audience here, Aylon, who's leading that initiative with regards to providing information, guidance to faculty. We talked about risk in the prior question, so ditto to Lester on your feedback was well done. In my department, I'm actually hired 5 students. We have a baccalaureate program at San Diego City. I brought on those 5 students to provide support, so we have awareness campaigns. They're also learning, they're participating in the SOC analysis that we have as well. So it's really important that, one, I get help from some really smart individuals, but more importantly, we're creating a pathway for those individuals for jobs. If they stay with us, great. If they are able to move on, great as well. At San Diego as well, we are partnering with the State Chancellor's Office, the Governor's Office, the CSU, and the UC system. So we're part of something called the National Research Platform, the first community college district in the nation that's doing this as well. So we allow our faculty, I mentioned about the software stack, the stack, or level 2 of that stack allows the AI development and that environment for faculty to actually start teaching within an ecosystem that's safe and secure. So this is a moving target. You have to stay ahead. You have to, it's going to keep us busy. This is not a one and done. So it's an exciting opportunity for us as we continue to evolve our positions in really enhancing and developing the future of support within this environment.
Thanks for that. Reflecting for us, AJ, what are new, surprising, different that you're working on?
So I think for us, I mean, we have, we use Copilot for the school division for staff, not all staff, but quite a few of them. But I think for us, at the end of this month, we are implementing some of the AI features for our high school kids. That's a first for us. And so it's nerve-wracking, but it's exciting. And so that's kind of our next step, like what AI can we implement that is safe enough to keep to also enhance and be innovative at the same time to enhance their learning.
Love it. Lester.
So 2 things. You mentioned as a SOC environment, right? We're in the process of consolidating and finalizing bringing our SOC in-house, but our Tier 1 is going to be ran by students. Give them practical experience along those lines, but on top of that, not the traditional Tier 1 SOC where you do IOC enrichment and escalation, et cetera, et cetera. We eventually want to create a program where they're doing SOAR playbooks and then leveraging agentic AI, because really If we weren't higher ed and I was running a security team, I probably wouldn't be looking at staffing my tier 1 with actual people, right? But in this instance, because of our mission, that is something that we're focused on along those lines. So equipping them with the tools and the skill sets to be competitive in the market along those lines. So that's just one example.
Good one. Thank you, Lester. And Stephen, final word.
Yeah, we're implementing a number of agents right now to help make us more efficient, particularly focused in areas like, for example, all our endpoint deployments are in Intune at this point. There's the emergence of agents that can help us do vulnerability detection in that. Same thing with agents that relate to, I mentioned triage earlier, all of those pieces, but we're doing a lot of work with conditional access. And some of the agents will now help us analyze our conditional access to make sure that we're actually getting the protections out of it that we think we are. And so the emergence of all these new tools are just giving us a more powerful suite to be able to build that fortress around our data that we talked about.
Thanks, Stephen. And colleagues, could you just join me in thanking our panel, AJ Phillips, Lester Godsey, Stephen, and Peter, not forgetting you. Thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. Our friends, apart from Peter, who's going to run and catch a cab, are around for a few moments if you want to pick their brains about something you've heard or want to ask me more about the rabbit-proof fence in Australia. You're welcome.